Right, and we close today with programmatic, which we've heard a great deal about today. There's reference sideways, indirectly, directly, and indeed something that data scientists are very much getting their heads around. So let me introduce the panel, and the panelists who will do this. We've got Matt Prohaska, he's the CEO of Prohaska Consulting. Jeremy Crandall with Adroit Digital, if you come and join us, as it is portrayed here. And Chris O'Hara with Crooks Digital, joined finally with Jon Usry, Director of Digital Platforms at DMN Media. And I hand over to Matt to take you through the panel. Welcome, all of you.
Thank you, appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for still being here. We know that for some of you, depending on what country you've arrived and when you arrived, it might be 5 a.m. Your time on either side of the globe. So we appreciate you normally staying this long to a final panel, and especially given the time zones, but hopefully we'll make it worth your while with some engaging content and hopefully learning a couple of things. Before we get into a little bit of an overview, just a quick poll of the room if possible. How many folks here are working at a company that is currently engaged in some form of programmatic advertising that you know of? Show of hands on the yes. Okay, great. So maybe 60-40. Okay, good. We wanted to see, how much of this would be for newbies or people. We want to be able to help answer some questions for those who maybe have heard of programmatic advertising, certainly referenced quite a bit today, but who have not been either personally or their organization has not been involved as much. But also what you'll hear from our great panelists, some ways that if you have been involved in the past 6 to 66 months, some new things that might be on the horizon. For us, just to set the stage a little bit, and a quick little public service announcement about why the heck this guy is up here talking. We lead a programmatic consulting practice, actually, that provides programmatic help for all. We sit agnostically across 6 different customer groups. For what it's worth, the publisher clients, as you might imagine, are about 60% composition of our client base. We've been proud to help more than 60 companies now just in the last year from 8 different countries ranging from the Philippines to Ireland, Portugal, Canada, England, and of course the United States. We've done a lot of advertising technology reviews, and we'll talk about the value of not only building a great team, but also great technology around you. And we'll hear from one of the leading technology platforms from Chris and Crux. Our team is 28 people across the globe that do a series of either strategy or project or business development team work. I've got a couple of gray hairs and have been proud to be in digital advertising since before Netscape 1.0, and have a double privilege not only of leading this great panel, but it's a bit of a homecoming for me in that I used to work 10 floors up there and had the privilege of representing a wonderful global brand as the New York Times in building out its programmatic practice about a year and a half ago, or a couple of years ago. So for those of you who have maybe heard a little bit about programmatic and could use sort of hey, we've heard it means different things to different people. Here is the official Interactive Advertising Bureau, one of our clients, the IAB, here in the US. Their definition is on top, and our definition, or one sentence explaining what the word means, is at the bottom. The history of this, it was coined by an industry veteran about 4 or 5 years ago in a trade column who made up the word. And it was a bit of a mashup between using computer programs or algorithms to just buy and sell more automatically. Again, I think these slides will be available after. You can just see me, Matt, at prohaskaconsulting.com for any follow-up needed here. The benefits to programmatic and why people are getting involved, and we'll talk about a little of the history of why certainly the buyers and advertisers have so heavily invested in this and been able to take advantage of this programmatic landscape over the last 6-7 years. But even now for sellers and the publishers here in the room, efficiency is the name of the game. And when a seller normally hears efficiency, there's an understandable knee-jerk or negative reaction because, oh, that smells like cheaper or lower price, or cost per thousands, or lower price on my inventory. we put that in our high-end graphic of low font, small font, and gray text, because actually what we'll find is that as programmatic has advanced, the greater efficiencies for both buyer and seller have to do with both the speed of the transaction, something that may not be as sexy or as prevalent or obvious, but you can actually find some real efficiencies in your organization to be able to process transactions better, and then the efficiency of audience targeting and being able to segment your audiences differently and more powerfully than you ever have before. This makes us look like a really big consulting practice when we say we've commissioned an artist to depict the exchanges. This is actually my dad's drawings. He's an art teacher and a retired artist. And so one of the trends we'll talk about today is the difference between some of the early nature of how programmatic transactions have taken place in an open auction, sort of this melee of buyers rummaging around. Imagine your 300 by 250 ad would be an article of clothing. And imagine thousands of publishers dumping their unsold inventory in one cardboard box with a lot of buyers having a really good time rummaging around and finding very, very good bargains. And then contrast that with where a lot of publishers have moved forward and being more aggressively involved in engaging their sales team and their audience development teams, as we heard earlier, and their operations teams, and actually setting up what are called private exchanges, where there's a known seller, a known buyer, and there are some privileges given to that advertiser for the right to be able to access that inventory and audience uniquely. So we'll get into some of the blocking and tackling of what that means with our panel as well. A couple other top-level observations around where things are programmatically regionally, and forgive, it's always tough when we talk in terms of large regions that obviously there are going to be people on and organizations on all ends of the spectrum. We're in Copenhagen in a few weeks with one of our publisher clients that's a little more advanced, and then we're in another part of Europe where they're not as advanced. But overall, the EU is actually leading the way globally in terms of the development of private exchanges, partly because it's a relatively tighter-knit community, and they've had a lot more practice at being able to engage with sellers and buyers. And they've had some challenges, as you may know, due to some regulation around how the actual cookie or unique ID is being leveraged versus in the US or in APAC. Regions that may have their digital practice a little less developed versus legacy print or TV and radio historically are a little bit more behind in programmatic today, and we'll talk about some of the ways that folks can catch up, certainly. And within the digital environment, those who are a little more developed in mobile and video are a little more behind, just because and we'll talk about some of the challenges around programmatic mobile buying and selling and programmatic video and how those dynamics of supply and demand. As all of you, I'm sure many of you have seen your traffic spike quite a bit around mobile access versus traditional desktop. We'll talk about that, what that means in a programmatic setting as well. One of the last things, and a nice segue with the last group that we'll touch on today, is a phenomenon that some more advanced publishers have been taking advantage of, and that is developing a data or inventory co-op. And we use a visual of a bullseye here to explain. Imagine the automotive section of your particular website would be when people are in there and engaged hardcore. That would be the red bullseye, high value, high price, high engagement, but not always able to reach all of those people at the same time. Imagine the white ring then being finding people who are in that automotive section, but then later finding them across your newspaper site. The blue ring, which is about a 2-year phenomenon, been relatively going on, is called an off-site audience extension, where you take those same people engaged in that automotive behavior, and then the publisher actively goes and finds those people across the interweb or the internet. And then the newer phenomenon that we'll speak to today that Crux is certainly involved in, and that a lot of publishers have started rallying behind, is this green ring, where there are a group of publishers, whether they're in Denmark or a group of local publications powered by Google, or by 5 different publications in France, or by about 50 publications across the UK through the Association of Online Publishers, being able to leverage the power of coming together and having one great audience and being able to scale their own budgets and relationships with their advertisers. Frankly, to possibly compete a little bit with Google and Facebook and a couple of global behemoths like that, but also to leverage the power and the uniqueness of their own audience and editorial. So with that, that's a little bit of a stage setting. Wanted to turn it over now to our first panelist. And the way we'll do this, we'll have some opening comments and thoughts from each of our participants, and then we'll engage with a couple of questions. And feel free, as we've seen you do all day, to raise your hand. We'll signal and be able to ask questions throughout. So with that, we'll turn things over to, it's always polite to hear from the buy side first. So we'll hear from our top buyer, Jeremy Crandall, leads all of operations and client services at Adroit Digital. Adroit is a spinoff owned by a company called MediaMath, one of the granddaddies of demand-side platforms, one of the champions of programmatic buying since the infancy of programmatic about 6-7 years ago. So Jeremy will speak to a little bit of how Adroit addresses the landscape and how they take advantage of this landscape for its clients. Jeremy?
Thank you, Matt. Hi, everybody. Fun fact about me before I get started, I'm actually a New York Times baby. So it's an honor and a thrill for me to be here. My parents met. My dad was part of the bullpen in the 70s. My mom was a copy editor. They met, they fell in love, they had me. So quite literally, I would not be here were it not for the New York Times. So it's really wonderful to be back here now in a career sense, talking about something that has become my life's work as a career, which is programmatic advertising. So thank you for having me. And so, as Matt mentioned, I work for MediaMath. I've worked for MediaMath for almost 5 years now. MediaMath invented the term DSP, or demand-side platform, back, it'll be 8 years ago this August. I've been there for 5 years, so I've seen a good bit of the evolution that's happened, and it has been a wild and a wonderful ride. And so I'm going to reify some of the things that Matt said about programmatic, specifically with a buy-side perspective for you. And I'll just say that Adroit works both with agency partners as well as direct clients. So I've seen both sides of that fence. And so the definition of programmatic per Merriam-Webster, I'm so small I'm not even going to be able to read it, but of the nature of or according to a program, schedule, or method. Not very helpful in this context, right? What is it that we mean when we're actually using this term in ad tech? To me, there are really two major aspects of programmatic advertising. The first one, and the one that people think about the most, is really automation. And so it's taking things that formerly were done in a manual way, things that were done by phone call, by fax, by email, by Excel, and turning those into things that can actually be brought to bear for machines, for example, to do machine-to-machine communication, to facilitate the transaction of literally tens of billions of ad impressions on a daily basis. That is the thing that you hear of probably the most often. When people talk about programmatic, they use the phrase RTB, or real-time bidding, and that is exactly that process that I just alluded to. To me, programmatic is sort of like a BLT sandwich, and people get obsessed with the bacon because lots of people like bacon. RTB is the bacon of that programmatic, but really there are other aspects, such as workflow automation, which helps to just reduce friction between the buy and the sell side, make the whole transaction more efficient, as Matt mentioned. Reduce the Excel, reduce the faxing, right? Hopefully make the whole process of negotiating a buy, everything from communicating RFP, avails, right, to actually executing an insertion order, to then running the buy, getting confirmation of the buy, getting reporting on it, and even someday doing billing automation, really are the kind of the bookends of that whole process that we're working to automate. And so again, most people talk about RTB, but really there's a whole lot of other, crunchy tomato and lettuce and mayo and great bread that represents the real picture for programmatic. The second major aspect of programmatic is really that it's data-driven. So instead of going out and buying, doing a homepage takeover for Yahoo Class 1 inventory, for example, and buying as many impressions as you can afford to buy, you can actually cherry pick and you can say, I know who my users are, what my audience is, and I want to find them opportunistically where I can in various different parts of the web. And so really automation, again, one side, and data-driven being the other side to me of the key components of programmatic. So let's dig into the modes in which you can buy programmatically and sell, obviously. and Matt already alluded to this as well. One is OpenRTB, and that was that cardboard box filled with 3,000 t-shirts of various different sizes, colors, logos, right? The notion of remnant advertising, you may hear that term as well. Really all remnant means is it wasn't sold by a direct salesperson. There wasn't a steak dinner involved and a 3-martini lunch involved in actually selling that inventory, unfortunately. It was impressions that made it into an auction, right? And that auction is typically, in the OpenRTB world, it's what's called a second price auction. I'll get into that in a little second. But the key thing to understand is that this transaction must happen very, very quickly. This automated, data-informed, data-driven sort of process must happen in less than 100 milliseconds. In the time that it's taking that web page to load and those ad slots to be filled, calls are going out to various different exchanges and SSPs. Bids are coming back from that end. Those bids are being informed, hopefully on the basis of, do I want this impression, right? Is it for a user that I'm interested in buying an ad impression against? If so, what price do I want to pay for it? And all of that decision, the sort of binary yes, no, do I want it? But then the further, more complicated shades of gray, how much do I want to bid for it? That all has to happen. All the bids have to be submitted. The ranking and the winning has to take place so that the winning ad can be selected and rendered on the page in less than 100 milliseconds. So it really is a formidable amount of technology that's being brought to bear on something that seems to be should be a simple process. So as Matt mentioned, it really is a many-to-many marketplace. Any buyers can buy from any sellers that are exposing that inventory in that marketplace. And it functions in what we call a second price auction, which means if you submit the winning bid, the highest bid, you don't pay the amount that you submitted, you pay a penny more than the next guy, the next lowest bid, right? So benefits to buyers are that you get massive scale because OpenRTB, again, there are more than 80 billion impressions, I know, for display alone on a daily basis that certainly MediaMath sees. So massive opportunities for scale, the benefit of a second price, and what I'm calling opportunism, right? The ability to buy an audience in a sort of cherry-picking fashion. The second major paradigm is really what we call private marketplaces, or PMP for short, because everything has to have an acronym. And so it leverages really the same pipes. It's the same fundamental plumbing that's working, but it uses a deal ID as essentially a key between a publisher and a buyer, a seller and a buyer. And what that does is it makes it much more of a walled garden. A publisher can say, I'm going to expose this amount of inventory to my private marketplace, and I'm going to invite you, buyer you, and buyer you, and buyer you, but not you, and not you. And so the way that inventory is essentially unlocked is through this deal ID mechanism. So instead of having a many-to-many, you have one publisher to one advertiser, or perhaps one to multiple advertisers, but certainly not one to all comers. Deal IDs also have price floors usually associated with them. So instead of being a second price auction mechanism, there's actually a $2 floor, a $3.50 floor, an $8 floor, whatever it might be. And everybody probably has heard the term waterfall. Typically, these ad impressions, if they go unsold in that private marketplace opportunity, they make their way onto OpenRTB. So this is, in essence, sometimes a way station on the way to OpenRTB. If I'm a buyer, what are the benefits to me of a private marketplace? One, brand safety and determinism, right? I know what it is that I'm buying. It's not going into the grab bag of t-shirts. I'm intentionally, concertedly buying publisher XYZ. Key takeaways, and these are for buyers and sellers alike. These pipes, they're great. It's wonderful. It's been a wonderful invention, right, to bring automation to the world of advertising. They're sort of necessary, but they're not sufficient in my view. They have exposed the opportunity to have more relationships amongst humans, really, amongst buyers and sellers than existed before. And it is really those relationships that still matter a whole lot. When I go and make a private marketplace buy with a publisher, I'm leveraging the pipes to do that, yes, but I'm still talking to the publisher. I'm still communicating about the success of that buy, the intent that I'm trying to achieve with the campaign, the results that I'm seeing from it, both absolute and sort of relative, right? And it really has, I have seen it work in a great way to foster new relationships amongst buyers and sellers that didn't exist before. And again, sharing that data, explaining about the KPIs, explaining about the success of the campaign can really help to increase the efficacy of the buy, because the publisher, if they find out that it's not working very well, you're not hitting your CPA target, your click-through rates are too low, your viewability metrics are too low, they can make recommendations, they can change the nature of that private marketplace deal to expose different inventory that may have a better shot at actually hitting those KPIs. So really it is that back and forth partnership and communication that, yes, the pipes are enabling it, they're necessary, right? But it really still comes down to having a great relationship and trading information back and forth. And as Matt mentioned, what we see at Adroit and MediaMath is both the rise of sort of the buy-side data co-op. That is one thing that Adroit is really sort of our secret sauce, our special differentiator amongst the marketplace. And then on the publisher coalition side, you see things like Pangea. I'm sure we're going to talk about that more. So just a key takeaway, a theme that we're seeing in the marketplace. And viewability. Just wanted to get in a POV on viewability. Yes, viewability is a currency, and it is increasingly important in our industry and increasingly important for publishers and for advertisers alike. It can be addressed through private marketplaces, but I, as a buyer, fully expect to pay a premium for that. I know nobody wants to get paid less than they're getting paid now. I don't think if I have to transact on a VCPM or viewable CPM currency that I should pay the same amount that I would pay for the sort of tonnage. So just my POV there. And I will show you.
Cool, thanks, Jeremy.
Okay.
Thank you, yeah. We can do that. Yeah. So I think our next speaker would have a little bit of a comment on that as well. It's always neat the way, fortunate the way we've set this up. So we've heard from a buyer. We're going to hear from a classic company that sits in the middle, in between buyers and sellers, and that's one of the leading global data management platforms, and Crux. And then we'll hear from Jon, a leading seller at Dallas Morning News. But first, Chris O'Hara is VP of Strategic Accounts at Crux. And very similar to how we had talked about, many of the technologies and the advantages had been heavy on the buyer side, giving them an advantage. Crux was one of the first companies, actually, that said, hey, a lot of this first-party data analysis that buyers have, it might be neat to empower publishers with that same thing. So Chris is here to give a little bit of a background and then talk about some more advanced things that Crux is up to. Chris.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. I think I'm a New York Post baby. Not sure about the Times.
That's
born on 13th
tough to admit
Street.
in this room, but fair. That's
not as
transparent
classy,
here.
But I thought it'd be fun
paper in New York, if you're not familiar.
to actually look at the evolution of how publishers get paid and how transactions happen over the last 20 years that banner advertising has sort of been around, or display advertising. And I think the dynamic we're all kind of familiar with is, back in the day you had, and this still exists today, you have your premium inventory, which is hidden behind your sales force, and it's really high quality. It's your index pages, your home pages, places where true user engagement actually happens. And you have everything else, which is basically lower on the page or not as valuable, or just a ton of inventory that generally you can't sell, which is remnant. Maybe you get $9 to $20 for the good stuff and 50 cents to $1 for the not so good stuff, right? So what happened a number of years ago is a lot of smart data people kind of came in and said, I have really good audience data. I actually know your audience a little better than you do, publisher. So you keep the $9 stuff, but I'm going to apply a little data to this remnant stuff, this 50-cent stuff, and I'm going to turn it into $1.50 stuff or $3.50 stuff, depending on how you can sell it. So that was sort of the ad network 1.0 model, where networks came in, they had a lot of third-party data, they applied it to inventory you couldn't sell, and they made a little money and you made a little money, and that was really easy. But I think where we're going and how we're seeing the future, and this is happening now, and crux actually as a DMP powers a lot of this dynamic, is the publisher can actually use data technology to collect their own first-party data, which is much more valuable and special and differentiated than third-party data, because third-party data may be a person goes to a website, sees a picture of a car, and then some arbitrary third party decides, oh, well, this person's an auto intender. Well, maybe it's just some kid looking at a bunch of pictures of cars and not, a guy 26 to 34 in market for a new BMW. But what publishers are increasingly doing right now is ingesting the data that they have on their own site or from CRM records or from, second-party data relationships they have, seeing a user engage with quality content over and over, maybe around autos or whatever, and using that data to say, hey, I know more about my inventory and my audience than anyone else, so I can influence how I sell my own premium inventory, and it's homepage plus auto intender or homepage plus dog lover or serial mom or what have you, but also use their own data to influence how they sell their own remnant inventory, and moreover, as you guys have talked about, actually be able to apply that same first-party data, take it outside their own walls, do reach extension, and actually enrich all kinds of buying. And of course, as the wheel kind of turns, what happened in the past is we were sort of monetizing down into this remnant stream of inventory. But now, for the first time with first-party data, publishers are actually coming back up and monetizing with data some of their truly premium inventory. So if you think about how this all happened over 15 years, is we had Publisher Direct, where the publishers had the technology, the ad server, they were totally in control of everything they sold. And then the ad network model, where networks had the data and they came in and they took advantage of this big sea of inexpensive unsold inventory, and they were in the driver's seat. And then all of a sudden we saw the buy side come in and say, listen, the ad networks are having so much fun, but we want to buy this kind of data capability, and we're going to come in and we're going to use our own data to influence how we buy on remnant. So almost the buy side was in total control of the procurement process. And now I think where we're going, and of course all of these models still exist and they're still very prevalent, but where we're going today is this notion of first-party data, which is allowing publishers to actually influence the way they do audience targeting on their own inventory and outside. And two, what we just discussed with Programmatic Direct, hey, I want to provide automation around the way you get to my inventory. I want to invite certain people in who I want to do transactions with, make private deals, whether it's through an RTB kind of functionality and the pipes that exist for programmatic, or it's a whole different stack of pipes which sort of are necessitated for true workflow automation. And I think that's kind of where we are right now, and we're moving very quickly to this idea of total automation across channels, not only display, but video, but mobile, email, being able to put a really intelligent layer of audience between the demand side person, the people they want to reach, and ultimately who purveys and delivers the last mile to that person itself, whether it's email or mobile or what have you. So you've probably seen something like this before, and I think it's a terrible, terrible dynamic for everyone in the industry, where the advertiser has $5 to spend, and his agency takes their piece, and then the ad network who's representing the inventory takes a really big chunk, and then you got a data provider who takes 5%, and the ad exchange takes a little, and there's probably an SSP or something in the publishers. And then the publisher, of course, has an ad server too. And at the end of the day, you end up with a lousy $1.80, right, if you're lucky. And I think what we're seeing, not only at Crux, but I think in any DMP, is you have a dynamic where a really big marketer, say that makes cereal in the Midwest, has a DMP and they have their own first-party data, and they know exactly who their cereal moms are. And instead of going through all those previous steps I described, they take their first-party data and they find in Meredith, maybe, or moms.com or Cafe Mom, the cereal moms they want to reach, and they take that audience data and they plop it right into your instance of DFP or whatever Seismic or whatever ad server you're using. So now I just turn that $5 into $4, and maybe the agency is still involved, maybe not. but real value was captured. I got the exact kind of audience I wanted, maybe lookaliked it to expand it a little, and found it in a clean, well-lit, beautiful environment where I know my users are because I validated that because everyone's sitting on the same technology. And this is the wave of the future. It's happening now, and it's super exciting. And what this independent data layer of people data can do is, we talked about consortiums. So Crux powers 4 or 5 different consortiums. One is Laplace Media in France. So help all these relatively smaller publishers get together and say, hey, I don't have the scale of Google or Facebook, but I have a ton of really great users. They all have similar interests. I'm going to create a taxonomy that combines them all. And then when I'm in an RFP and I need this reach number that was impossible to have, now my buddies are with me and everyone participates, and there's a real give to get sort of financial incentive for being in this consortium. Second thing is publishers can leverage DMPs for internal audience targeting and analytics. So I know who my audience is, I know how to reach them, I know how to connect that marketer directly to my audience reach extension. What if I'm ESPN? I know more about sports audience than anyone else, right? Why should someone go to an ad network or a DSP and try to buy different sports packages when I could create this network, curate it, use my own first-party data, push that data into my own sort of specially curated reach model? And we're seeing that every day. And last but not least, cross-device. How can I use that audience layer of data to plug a desktop user and find that same desktop user on his mobile device and on his tablet? And that takes a lot of first-party data, it takes sharing among publishers, and we're seeing this really happen as well. So happy to talk more about that at length, and we do work with a lot of you guys in the room and a lot of other publishers and marketers as well. So thanks.
Good, thanks. So with that, speaking of evaluating platforms at a publisher, we want to turn it over to Jon Usry now. Jon is the director of digital platforms, actually, at Dallas Morning News. When I sat up there about a year and a half ago, I remember saying the line that over a 6-month period, I had met with 200 different ad technology companies at least once. I'm sure Jon has been at it for a while, longer than that now at Dallas, and that number is probably higher. And so he's going to talk about what it means at a leading publisher here in the States and globally to be able to organize talent and technology to engage proactively in programmatic. Jon?
Thanks, Matt. And I just realized I have the distinct honor of being the one thing that stands between you, cocktails, and probably a great night in the town. So I'll work a deal with you guys. If you be nice to me on the Q&A, I promise to keep my presentation brief. But thanks for that, Earl. So yeah, I just want to spend a few minutes, and thanks for teeing that up, Matt. I want to spend a few minutes just talking about how this disruptive technology force of programmatic has impacted our business as a publisher. So AHBLO, which is our parent company for the Dallas Morning News, as you can see from this, it was founded in 1842, right? So a lot of things have held true over the past 170 years. Our mission statement, our core value, our principles, but certainly a lot of things have changed significantly, right? How we distribute that news content, our audiences, and from my perspective, how we monetize those audiences. So what you'll see here from this hub of AHBLO, the holding company, we've made a strategic decision recognizing the fact that print distribution of news content and monetization using printed advertising will continue to decline, right? So to get ahead of that, we've made this strategic decision that we need to either build or purchase digital marketing solutions so that we have a more contemporary portfolio of companies that we can, and we're positioned to take advantage of the opportunities in the marketplace. So this, diagram would look radically different 5 years ago, right? It would just be the publishing entities and maybe one of the, shared digital marketing, which is DM Media. But included in that is a social marketing agency, a paid for performance, or a paid search agency, native agency. So we've really diversified our portfolio and heavied up on digital. So that's the direction we're going. And one thing to look at this from a programmatic lens, right? So if I look at these different holding companies, programmatic has some sort of play, and some companies more than others, but it's impacting our organization as a whole. So it's very important for us at AHB, at the corporate side, to understand programmatically from an intimate standpoint so that we can leverage that across our different business units. Now, let's talk a little bit about the history of programmatic from a publisher's perspective, right? Programmatic kind of came on the scene back in 2008, 2009 maybe. And this was largely technology that was innovation brought to market by the media buyers, the agency trading desks, the big agencies. And so this was largely not understood by publishers like ourselves. And with that lack of understanding, there was kind of a natural concern or fear about that. You know, I think programmatic was perceived as a threat, not an opportunity. Some of the underlying concerns with programmatic from a publisher's perspective, and some of these may hold true today, right? But in the past, certainly was, okay, clearly the buyers seem to have the advantage here. But is this going to conflict with my direct sales channel? You know, is this going to commoditize my inventory, erode my CPMs? You know, why am I getting all these teeth whitening ads on my site? Is this, you know, compromising the user experience as a trusted local news publisher? So these are a lot of the concerns that were being discussed, certainly within our wall, and I suspect with other publishers as well. So let's fast forward to today. So publishers are now starting to decipher programmatic, decipher the code. All right, so there seems to be more parity, I believe, on the buyer side and the seller side. There's been a lot of good innovation and development from the sell side platforms of the world, and as well as the DMP. So it's more of a level playing field these days. You know, so publishers are starting to understand how to leverage their first-party data, tap into third-party data, and be able to focus on selling audiences. So, you know, conversations within AHB and Dallas Morning News. Now we're actually having strategic conversations on how we can leverage programmatic platforms and these emerging channels and within programmatic to increase our yield. In addition, go after incremental revenue streams beyond the selling of our non-guaranteed or indirect or remnant inventory. We're also having to rethink the waterfall. There might be certain situations where we want programmatic demand competing with our direct sales. Not all situations, but those are the conversations that we're having internally now. And then, of course, what is the impact to our org structure, right? Who do we need? Where do they sit? Do they sit in ad ops? Do they sit in sales? Do they sit somewhere in between? What are the critical skills to be successful in this? So, and then how do we pay them? Do we pay these salespeople commission on sales through programmatic channels? So these are a lot of the things that we're still trying to address and solve for now. But I think we're in a much better state. I think there's more parity between the buyers and sellers. And then finally, all right, the future of programmatic, I think it looks promising, right, for all parties. Right? Some characteristics of what I believe the future of programmatic 2 to 3 years out would be, of course, I think we'll see a lot more premium type of ad units, rich media, proprietary ad units that are being developed by publishers, being sold and bought through programmatic channels. Listen, big data is going to continue to get bigger. Programmatic and big data is a perfect marriage, right? So I think as the technology solutions evolve, publishers will be, as well as agencies and marketers will have better tools to capture, analyze, and take action on that big data that's out there so that we're all making smarter decisions, data-informed decisions around marketing. Mobile's going to dominate. This shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, right? I think the eMarketer predicts that by 2016, 70% of all programmatic ad spend will be within the mobile channel, right? So there's certain technical barriers today that was highlighted about the lack of cookie and use of UID in the mobile space, but I think those will be solved for in the programmatic 2 to 3 years out. And then finally, as a publisher, we've built through technology partnerships this integrated ad tech, our ecosystem, if you will. And the challenge that we have in many cases is that the data resides in these different systems. And it's hard to pull that data and hard to leverage the data from these disparate systems. So I think as what we'll see in the programmatic future here, a couple of years out, much more concerted effort to unify those data sets whether it be through one enterprise level provider or just better server-to-server or API integration between these different systems so that we can better leverage that data and make programmatic perform more efficiently. Real quick snapshot. This is, my apologies, this is US numbers, but this demonstrates the explosive growth of programmatic, right? So we're looking at, in the dark blue, 2014 compared to 2016. We're looking at doubling the size of programmatic media spend in the US alone, over 106% lift from 2014 to 2016. And I think it's also important to point out where that incremental lift is coming from. As you can see here, programmatic direct or programmatic guaranteed is driving a majority of that. So these programmatic channels are really starting to mature here. And as a publisher, we're very intrigued and are focused on this programmatic direct because it was highlighted before. Programmatic direct or programmatic guaranteed or however you want to label it, that's really kind of a one-to-one buy-sell relationship of guaranteed impressions at a negotiated rate. So that's a transaction that we're accustomed to as a publisher, right? One-to-one buying and selling at a negotiated rate and guaranteed impressions. So we're very bullish, and as is, I guess, the people that were feeding the responses for this eMarketer survey. This is kind of a high-level conceptual diagram, if you will, of the programmatic, our ad tech stack at Dallas Morning News. As you can see, programmatic plays a very central part to our ad technology stack. In fact, we leverage programmatic both on the buy side and on the sell side of the equation. On the buy side, we have a number of advertisers that come to us and need more reach than we can provide with our owned and operated inventory. So we'll tap into the exchanges or the open marketplaces and source highly targeted audiences in order to help our advertising clients get additional reach. Some cases, clients come to us and they want reach that's outside of our own market. So we have a team of folks that are trained and hired and staffed to do just that, place programmatic media buys and sourcing those audiences inventories for those instances where clients need additional reach, deeper pools of audience inventory. On the sales side, right, so we've been leveraging traditional sell-side platforms or SSPs to help us maximize or optimize the revenue yield of our owned and operated inventory. Now, majority of that today is going through the kind of open marketplace, but more and more we're seeing demand for private marketplace offerings as well as programmatic direct. So, again, in sync with this previous slide that shows the projections of growth in programmatic direct and private marketplaces, that's where we're focusing our energies as a highly effective tool to maximize or optimize our revenue yield for programmatic channels. One other thing to point out, so the one thing that we're trying to build out here, and this is still early stage, but again, going back to the second slide that showed that we recognize that programmatic has a profound impact to all of our business units, or most of them today, but certainly all of them going forward. So we need to establish and build out kind of a center of excellence within our organization that has an intimate understanding of programmatic and where the opportunities are and where the challenges are. So these are the people that we're going to champion to go out and educate our sales folks, educate our ad ops folks, and just really be the programmatic champions within our organization. And then in conclusion, I'll leave you with a few takeaways here. This is for the publishers in the room. Certainly establish programmatic as a core competency, right? That's what we're focused on. The numbers, listen, it's a freight train that's coming. Programmatic is coming, like it or not. So if as you're a publisher, you need to embrace it, right? And prepare for it. So we're all in on programmatic, but we're going to be smart about it. So we want to make sure we have the right resources, right technology providers in place so that we're positioned to leverage all the opportunities that come with programmatic today and more importantly in the future. So, select the right technology partners. So, I'm very high maintenance when it comes to our technology partners because programmatic brings with it a lot of steep learning curves, right? And so, and it's still very early stage for programmatic. So why not lean on these technology providers? They know a lot about the space that we may not know, And so I'm constantly pounding my guys that are help build out this technology platform, again, this programmatic-centered technology ad tech stack. Help me understand programmatic. Where are the opportunities? Where are you seeing successes? What are the best practices? Teach me so that I can be the champion within my organization. So leverage those technology partners. Make sure that they're highly consultative, as well as can satisfy in a robust platform that can grow with you. Embrace the culture of test and learn. Again, this is programmatic. It's still relatively new. It's kind of new frontiers. So it's important that there's not this fear. You have to be brave. I think a panelist spoke earlier about courage, right? Have courage. The playbook for programmatic for publishers isn't fully written yet. So there has to be a culture that embraces testing and learning. Create your hypotheses, test those hypotheses, learn from that, and reinvest those learnings into your organization. And then finally, hire the right talent. Programmatic doesn't replace humans, but it may require different skill sets, right? So what I look for in my team, the folks that are really in the weeds with programmatic technology every day, are these data geeks with great personalities, right? So that's kind of my sweet spot, and that's what I look to hire. So that concludes my presentation. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Jon.